Dames en here, die akademiese prosessie sal binnekort inbeweeg. U word versoek om asseblief op te staan. Ladies and gentlemen, the academic procession will enter shortly. You are kindly requested to stand. Bomma le botate, molokoloko wa dirutegi o tla tsena mo nakong ye kopana. Le gopelwa go ema.
Good afternoon. By the power vested in me, I hereby constitute this assembly as a legal congregation of the University of Pretoria. During this assembly, certificates, diplomas, and degrees, with all the associated rights and privileges, will be awarded and conferred on the candidates whose names appear in the program. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Dames en here, ons versoek 'n oomblik van stille gebed of meditasie uit dankbaarheid vir die prestasies van ons studente. Ladies and gentlemen, we request you to join us in silent prayer or meditation to give thanks for the achievements of our students. I thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as Vice Principal of the University of Pretoria, I extend a warm word of welcome to you at this graduation ceremony. I extend a particular word of welcome to the Executive Director, Professor Carolina Koornhof, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Vasu Reddy, the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Postgraduate Studies, Professor Maxi Skuman, the Deputy Dean responsible for teaching and learning of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Henny Stander, the Deputy Dean, Faculty of Health Sciences, Professor Tiaan de Jager, the recipient of one of the Honorary Doctorate Degree Awards, Professor G. Thurbon, recipient of the second Honorary Doctorate Degree Award, Professor Z. Wickham, chairpersons of schools, heads of departments, directors, emeriti, and honorary professors and other lecturers and their spouses. A word of welcome is also extended to supervisors, co-supervisors, and external examiners of Doctorandi. We extend a word of welcome to the representative of the Student Representative Council, who will present the SRC academic honorary colors. Then too, we send a warm word of welcome to all persons to whom certificates, diplomas, and degrees will be awarded and conferred on this afternoon. And last but not least, we extend a warm word of welcome to all spouses, parents, and other parties, as well as dignitaries whom we may not be aware of. Ladies and gentlemen, I now request the Dean to introduce to me the candidate for the honorary doctorate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I have the honor to introduce you to Professor Ane Axel Joran Thurbon for the conferment of the degree Doctor of Philosophy Honoris Causa. Professor Goran Thurbon, Emeritus Professor of Sociology at the University of Cambridge, and with extensive research and academic experience in his native land of Sweden, in the Netherlands, and many other countries, is a social scientist of the highest reputation. His contributions to scholarship cover a wide range of subjects and have received recognition through awards, prizes, and honorary degrees from many institutions and organizations. He held the chair of sociology at Cambridge from October 2006 until his recent retirement. Professor Thurbon has published over 15 single-authored books and edited many others. His oeuvre, including a very large number of articles, have appeared in 24 languages, including Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, French, German, Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Greek, Serbo-Croat, Hungarian, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish, Arabic, Persian, and Chinese. His central interests concern power and its exercise in society. Topics on which he has written extensively include the intersection between the class structure of society and the function of the state apparatus, the formation of ideology within subjects, and the future of the Marxist tradition. His major works have examined histories of political power in Europe, questions of modernity, global varieties of gender and family relationship, and poverty in relation to social power. As perhaps the leading contemporary authority on the capital city phenomenon, Professor Thurbon has provided much inspiration to the capital city's program at the University of Pretoria, and more broadly has inspired scholars and students across the social disciplines. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the honorary doctorate on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy, honoris causa, with all the associated rights and privileges on Professor Ane Axel Joran Thurbon. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have the honor of requesting Professor Ane Axel Joran Thurbon to address this assembly.
Mr. Vice Principal, Mr. Dean, Mr. Deputy Dean, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say a few words about the urban, the national, the popular, and the global. Cities are where strangers meet, including stranger disciplines, from economics to art history. I educated myself as a macro-analyst at the interface of politics and sociology. But twice in my intellectual life, have gone into long periods of intensive new learning. One went into learning about childhood conditions and sex, gender, family relations in the world. And the other one was to immerse myself in cities. My approach to the urban starts from political and cultural sociology and continues into urban planning, architecture, and the history of public art. I focused on two dimensions of the urban, as provider of meaning to social life and as structuring social relations. Modern cities are situated in nation-states. The city is the point of maximum concentration for the power and culture of a community, the great urbanist Louis Mumford once wrote. Therefore, cities have a great deal to tell us about nations, nation-states, and their regimes. And this holds to a special degree for capital cities, which have been the focus of most of my urban research. Nation-states differ in the national foundations. The Union of South Africa, for example, was a state of white European settlers, for the settlers, and by the settlers, like the Americas or Australia. All settler states were constitutively racist, and racism was a fundamental principle of organizing the state and its territory, and of its cities, except where most of the natives had been killed off and the survivors pushed to the outbacks of the territory of the state. In a recent work, I've tried to follow the trajectory of the world's most important national capital cities, from their national foundations up until today. It then became clear that apart from the particular dramas and turns of individual nations, there are a couple of significant moments of a more general character in the history of most cities. We can discern popular moments and global moments. Popular moments arrive when and to the extent popular forces outside the constitutive national elite burst forward and get their voices heard and have an impact on the city. In Europe, such moments were usually associated with class and the rise of the working class. The first urban form of a popular moment was so-called municipal socialism. This was a kind of city government geared to serving also the needs of working class people, above all of housing and popular culture. After World War II, wider popular power created welfare states, which also had their urban manifestations. The popular has also been expressed in influential protest movements. The most significant one was the North Atlantic movement from the late 50s to around 1980 against dissecting the central city by motorways or rapid transit between the business districts and the middle class and upper middle class suburbs. In the settler states, class was usually overshadowed by race, and the popular moment took forms different from the European. Instead of urban socialism or social democracy, you got populism and racial rehabilitation. Racial rehabilitation, giving belated respect, recognition, and civic rights to the natives and to the descendants of slaves, was a phenomenon of all the settler states of the last third of the 20th century. It was part of an epochal worldwide erosion of existential inequalities, of patriarchy and racism. The end of apartheid was a dramatic instance of this worldwide process, and it had a specific outcome repeated only in Bolivia a decade later. Because the African natives were the large majority of the population, the end of racism could not be accommodated within a reformed, opened settler state. The whole settler regime had to go. But I would argue that the new South Africa did not become an ordinary liberal democracy, but also a post-colonial democracy with several political and socio-cultural features similar to other countries coming out of an emancipation from colonialism, like India or other states of Africa. The meaning and manifestations of post-coloniality in today's South Africa are outside the scope of this talk. But let me draw your attention to its magnificent iconographic expression in the Freedom Park, arguably the most profoundly considered and the most elaborate monument of a post-colonial nation, of any nation of the world. There are also global moments of urban history, moments of particularly strong international influence. The urbanity of the current moment of globalized capitalist aspirations has at least three distinctive features: verticality, novelty, and exclusivity. Verticality is expressed by skyscraping. Skyscrapers have always been symbols of wealth, profit-seeking, and status ambitions, with constant competition for building the tallest building of the city, of the nation, of the continent, of the world. By 1940, all the world's 100 tallest buildings were in the United States. Last year, in 2015, only 17 were. 32 were in mainland China, 25 in the Arab Peninsula, and 19 in the rest of East Asia. Novelty in global cities is on display in new business districts, new shopping malls, cultural showcases, conference centers, and new tourism and leisure venues. That is a whole set of new areas and buildings primarily geared to attracting money from abroad. Exclusivity is first of all manifested in the worldwide spread, since around 1990, of gating, closed-off residential areas. It has had a relatively little attraction in Western Europe and in Northeast Asia outside China, i.e. in the two least unequal regions of the world. The globalization of the real estate market adds another process of exclusion. Cities are combinations of buildings, streets, people, and images, never ceasing to fascinate the strolling flaneur, the curious tourist, and the investigating scholar alike. Most cities are also full of social and environmental problems, calling for critical discourse and civic activism. And cities have now become the destination of the majority of humankind. Whatever the track of investigation, scholars and students are likely to meet in cities sooner or later.
Ladies and gentlemen, I now thank Professor Thurbon once again for his informative presentation. I now request the Dean to introduce to me the candidate for the second honorary doctorate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I have the honor to introduce you to Professor Zoe Charlotte Wickham for the conferment of the degree Doctor of Literature, honoris causa. Professor Zoe Wickham is a distinguished and award-winning South African novelist, short story writer, and cultural critic. She's the author of 3 novels, 2 short story collections, and numerous works of literary and social criticism. Although her writing is distinctively South African, its ambit is wide-reaching and its concerns are global, as is her readership. Her novels and short stories have been translated into several languages, including French, German, Italian, Dutch, and Swedish. After further studies at the University of Reading, she moved to Scotland, where she taught creative writing and post-colonial literature at the University of Strathclyde, where she is currently an emeritus professor. Zoe Wickham received a number of awards for her work. These include the prestigious Wickham Campbell Literature Prize, established at Yale University, which she received in 2013, the first year the award was made. In recent years, 3 international conferences have been devoted to her work. This underscores the importance of her writing and its global significance. In her substantial body of work, Professor Wickham has provided nuanced explorations of complex questions relating to identity, race and gender, writing and textuality, history, and its presence in the present, and the meaning of home. More than any other contemporary South African writer, she has depicted the phenomenon of transnationalism and the circumstances of diasporic lives. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the honorary doctorate on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Literature, honoris causa, with all the associated rights and privileges on Professor Zoe Charlotte Wickham. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have the honor of requesting Professor Zoe Charlotte Wickham to address the Assembly.
Thank you for that generous introduction. When, as the first in my family, I thought of going to university in the 1960s, I was spared the inconvenience of choice. For an arts degree, UWC was the designated place for my ethnic group, and with my average school grades, a place at university was by no means assured. Certainly, I would have not been allowed at UP. So I'm inordinately pleased by this honor. It marks for me both the enormous changes that have occurred in the country, as well as the transformation within universities as demonstrated by this assembly of graduates today. Nowadays, very many young people expect to go to university. But why do we value university education? What is it for? Recently, the Nobel laureate J.M. Coetzee, at a similar gathering, urged graduates to become teachers. Teaching is arguably the most important job in any society, but Coetzee was pilloried and thought to be patronizing. The assumption is that universities are at the service of upward social mobility and economic progress, which the lowly profession of teaching does not bring. In other words, knowledge for its own sake is not seen to be valuable. Is it not the case that without well-educated teachers, pupils will not reach university, and if they do, will struggle with higher education, which is to say, with its language? There is a clear link between a poor education system and the conspicuous poverty of miles and miles of shacks that surround our towns and cities. So I want to make a plea for rethinking the notion of progress that universities are seen to bring, for diverting it from the purely economic success and the vulgarity of conspicuous consumption. Capitalism, after all, offers plenty of unsavory opportunities for economic bling. So what distinguishes higher education from that? I cling to the idea that the university as a haven for developing thought and disinterested knowledge, a place where we learn to write, to read and interpret beyond the basic model, and above all, a place where the poor who do not reach university are constantly in our minds. How wonderful it would be if this were the occasion when new graduates pledge to address poverty, pledge to live in pursuit of a more equal society, and so give new meaning to the idea of the good life. Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe tells a pertinent story which I've cited before, but which continues to release new meanings for me. Achebe's character, an old man who tells the tale, cannot read or write. His story is told to a gathering of people who've come to protest against a corrupt government. It goes like this. Once upon a time, the leopard, who'd been trying for many days to catch the tortoise, finally chanced upon him on a solitary road. "Aha," he said, "at long last, prepare to die." And Tortoise said, "Can I ask one favor before you kill me?" Leopard saw no harm in that and agreed. "Give me a few moments to prepare my mind," Tortoise said. Again, Leopard granted it, but instead of standing still, Tortoise went into strange action on the road, scratching with hands and feet and throwing sand furiously in all directions. "Why are you doing that?" Leopard asked. Tortoise replied, "Because even after I am dead, I would want anyone passing by this spot to say, 'Yes, a fellow and his match struggled here.'" Ladies and gentlemen, like Tortoise, I have faith in the art of writing, whether in print or whether marks in the sand. And that means faith in the related skills of reading and interpretation. Tortoise speaks of preparing his mind, and this act of the imagination makes me think of him as a poet. He shows us that writing, in saying so much more than it seems to say, has the power not only to represent, but also to transform. Overpowered, yes, but through writing, Tortoise changes his condition so that those who read the runic marks in the sand will not remember him as victim. Tortoise inscribes in the earth itself, marks in the earth itself, representing a struggle that may or may not really have happened. The passerby turns those signs into language and reproduces them, passes them on long after the wind and rain have erased the marks. So, the powerful may prey on the weak, but Leopard's victory is hollow. Surely it is followed by indigestion. Marked by the reflux of language that refuses closure, this victory poses questions about power. It remains open to revision and reinterpretation. So the old man's story then is one about language, struggle, and the imagination. Where is the home of language and the imagination, if not the university? Here we learn to make meaningful marks, to reproduce, interpret, and reinterpret the marks in our culture. It is also where the difficult decision is made on which language the business of reading and writing will be conducted in. If economic bling announces that you've arrived socially, then Tortoise's writing shows that there is no such thing as arrival at a fixed meaning. Leopard wins, but the struggle against power carries the day. It is at university, then, that we read the world with thought and care and attend also to rereadings that a new generation has to offer. Here, we go rich with knowledge. And disinterested knowledge makes an ethical demand that the struggle for equality, the struggle against poverty, be continued. By its earliest definition, a university is a community of scholars, and such a community conducts its business through language. There have been persuasive arguments for the universal language of economic advancement, that is, for English, as the medium of instruction. Now that that victory has been largely achieved, it would not hurt to reflect on a not-so-funny British joke about standard English being the dialect with an army and a navy, meaning that in the place of its birth, it is the means for protecting the powerful and maintaining the status quo. Dare we dream that it could serve a different purpose here? In recent student protests, the call for English came alongside the cry to decolonize the mind, echoing the work, of course, of Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Now, Thiong'o famously decolonized his own mind by refusing to write in English. Instead, he chose his native, Kikuyu. He asks, and I quote, "How did we arrive at this acceptance of the unassailable position of English in our literature, in our culture, in our politics? It is the final triumph of a system of domination when the dominated starts singing its virtues." Now, it is, of course, possible to decouple a language from exploitation and oppression. The standard varieties of both English and Afrikaans have indeed been subverted, most notably by poets and their transgressive tortoise actions. One such Afrikaans writer, Marlene van Niekerk, has the conformist rector of a university in Pretoria flown off into oblivion by a giant parrot. Fortunately, not of this university. Now, it is the poet, Michel Foucault reminds us, who beneath the expected differences rediscovers the buried kinship between things. So we need not think of the speakers of other languages as our adversaries. The politics of language alerts us to Foucault's murmur of analogies, also found between linguistic situations. There is a common purpose in universities, regardless of our preferred language. There is urgent tortoise work to be done. It is salutary that the question of indigenous languages has been raised here at Pretoria. But how will local languages like Sepedi, not connected with money and the social ladder, be more widely used, be legitimated? Will those who fought for English demand it? Our indigenous languages, too, are repositories of knowledge and culture, and therefore must be maintained and treasured. We cannot afford to lose them through disuse. The question of a university's language policy is a complex one that has exercised better minds than my own. I have no answers, but English does seem to carry also a whiff of Leopard's victory, one that cannot bring closure. Urgent questions persist. The university is the place where imaginative solutions will evolve, where the will to find ways to maintain and legitimate indigenous languages must be forged, where we struggle for their development. Gentlemen and ladies, let us continue to imagine multilingualism. Imagine a world in which ugly wealth at the expense of the poor is not a given, a world in which the spirit of tortoise lives on, And here today in Pretoria, I can't resist adding, let us also imagine a world in which girls choose how to wear their indigenous hair. I'm thrilled to have a doctorate from this university where language is vigorously debated. I'm especially grateful to the English department who recommended me. Thank you for this great honor.
Thank you, Professor Wickham, for that inspirational speech. In fact, I want to once again thank both speakers for speaking to topics that are fairly uppermost in our mind at this point in time. Ladies and gentlemen, I now request the Dean to introduce to me the candidates present whose names appear in the program.
Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidate has complied with all the requirements for the Advanced Diploma in Hearing Aid Acoustics. Stefan Matthijssen. Geachte visierektor, die volgende kandidaat het voldoen aan al die vereistes vir die graad baccalaureus artium. Ranjita Chetty. Marcel Fourie. Grobbelaar Brett P. Rorisang Dorothy Magale. Maleka Ramadimeche Boicanyo. Manhika Daisy Simon Capitine. Mashishi Khonse Shireen. Motiba Mama Sarah. Pingwana Lindokushle. Quinica Kanyisa Lucretia. Shilubana Eni Nshusheko. Zuke Nokanyiso Shanice. In law, Kirsten Meyer. Christian de Jaar. Thank you. Herbst Wessel Jacobus. Letlape Peño Fortune. Ndlovu Amanda Christine. Pinto Stephen Arnaldo. Robert Shaw Bethany May. Van der Bank Christo. In Visual Studies, Beckwith Chrisley Bia. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Arts, Human Movement Science. Kito Haley Bronman. Venter Honorary. Geachte visierector, die volgende kandidaat het voldoen aan al die vereistes vir die graad Baccalaureus Artium Tale. Grobler Monique. Shumba Ruvimbo Agnes. Smith Carla. In English Studies, Ngwasheng Neo Kobela Desiree. Osman Munaza. Peter Kayla. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Heritage and Cultural Sciences in Heritage and Cultural Tourism. Chochi Rorisang Stefina. Moloi Nwanabrom Rebecca. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Sports Science. Dewey Renee Dale. Matapa Arnold. Skinner Jason. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Political Sciences in International Studies. Chimwenyere Hazel. Masiba Avile Tobela. Nake Chachiso Michael. Pitsi Tsepang Catherine. Ramadwa Murendeni Ronel. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Social Sciences in Political Studies. Muratyana Lonwaba Zinzi. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Social Sciences in Industrial Sociology and Labor Studies, Bueta Benita. Okaya Maria Tracy. Van Zyl Albertus Johannes. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Social Work, Nkambule Zandile Petsumyaka. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Music. Skitter Martinez Louis. Van Belkom Elry with distinction. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Arts Honours in English, Best Nicole with distinction. Waniki Kendi Njoki. Chayana Saneze with distinction. In international relations, Gilbert Avian Conyete with distinction. Middleton Olivia. Oberholzer Sanet. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Historical and Cultural Science Honours in Heritage and Museum Studies. David Sepeke Sehuele. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Arts in African Languages. Mokoko Maiche Elizabeth. Motsepe Queen Madiku with distinction. In archaeology, Mlilo Trust. Nkumalo Bongumenzi Stembiso. In biblical and religious studies, Siame Lordwell. In English, Stein Dewald Moritz with distinction. In philosophy, Coombs Vihan Murray with distinction. Van Rensburg Rudolf Ernst with distinction. In clinical psychology, Carstens Jean-Pierre. Hofmeier Johann Heinrich. Kubeka Nompumelelo Prudence. Maestri Chanel. Travers Robin Bronwyn. Tsebe Komocho Sinna. Van Rooyen Holly Elizabeth. In research psychology, Kutser Charmey. Nolte Suzanne. Rakau Boitumelo Eufrancia. In visual studies, Brits Carly with distinction. In counseling psychology, Burns Amory with distinction. Geachte visierektor, die volgende kandidaten het voldoen aan al die vereistes vir die graad Magister Artium Inligtingsontwerp. Snyman Suzette. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Human Movement Science in Recreation and Sports Management. Manamela Mankopane Jacob. Motlohalwa Liepile Cyril. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Historical and Cultural Sciences in Heritage and Cultural Tourism, Van den Berg, Lisa Marguerite. In Cultural History, Fenoti Chantal Lynn. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Communication Pathology. De Kock Tasha with distinction. Hafinga Estienne with distinction. Hanan Tamar. Jones Gail Lorna with distinction. Letsualo Nolwazi Antoinette. Maleka Boledi Karabo with distinction. Pike Tamarin. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Social Work. Mota Lindelwa Zakiti Felicia. In healthcare, Machanye Tselang Marta. Matlala Lebochang Millicent. Matlawa Mashinyane Dikeledi. Virtue Dominic Gregory with distinction. In Social Development and Policy, Maigurira Doreen. Zata Tawanda Praise with distinction. In play-based intervention, Kruger Soleil. Shlawuli Nokwanda. Mohamisi Queen Mponyana. Van der Burg Nanette with distinction. Van Niekerk Magdalena. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Music in Performing Art, Janse van Vieren Catharina with distinction. Labuschagne Francois Johan with distinction. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Social Science in Industrial Sociology and Labor Studies. Malope Boitumelo James. In Gender Studies, Zoe Precious with distinction. Mr. Vice Principal, the supervisors will now introduce the doctoral candidates.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Clarence Chongo, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Decolonizing Southern Africa, a History of Zambia's Role in Zimbabwe's Liberation Struggle, 1964 to 1979, prepared under my supervision and that of Professor Ian Fimister as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the Prof investigated the nature of Zambia's role in Zimbabwe's liberation struggle. He explored the broad range of assistance which the Zambian government accorded the Zimbabwean liberation movements, which waged armed struggle against the Rhodesian government. In his analysis, he argues that Zambia's role was shaped by the ruling elites' ideological, strategic, and economic interests, which in turn shaped the attitudes, perceptions, and relationships of Zimbabwean nationalists competing for power within the liberation movements. The value of his investigation is that it enriches our understanding of the process of decolonization in Southern Africa. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Tlengiwe Portia Dlamini, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Constitutional Developments in the Kingdom of Swaziland, 1960 to 2005, prepared under my supervision. In her thesis, the promovenda traced and analyzed the constitutional history of Swaziland, beginning with the British-led deliberations that culminated in the Independence Constitution of 1968, through the overthrow of the same constitution by Swazi King Sobhuza II in 1973 in an auto coup. This was followed by a 32-year constitutional void, during which the king ruled by decree. The thesis concluded with an examination of the adoption of a new constitution in 2005, when King Mswati III and his supporters decreed a new constitution without multipartism. The study shows that the constitutional history of Swaziland between 1960 and 2005 was characterized by fierce contestation by various stakeholders who represented conflicting ideologies, and that the pervasive one-party state syndrome endemic in post-colonial Africa generally directly influenced the Swazi monarch's determination to reject multipartism. This study contributes to the historiography of the African decolonization process in general, and that of Swaziland in particular. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Fahima Mohammed Asmail, who has complied with the requirements for the degree DPhil with a thesis entitled School-Based Hearing Screening and Diagnosis Using Automated and Mobile Health Technologies, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Robert Eichelboom as co-supervisor. In her study entitled School-Based Hearing Screening and Diagnosis Using Automated and Mobile Health Technologies, the promovenda aimed to provide research-based recommendations for clinical practice of school-based hearing screening. The results indicated that mobile technology together with automated diagnostic audiometry may be a feasible solution to overcome many of the prohibitive challenges faced by school-based hearing screening programs. Furthermore, the findings of the study provide valuable baseline data for realistic planning and appropriate implementation of hearing health services for school-based hearing screening in South Africa. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Lukas Maklashela Makubela, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Conflict Resolution, the Somali Militia State, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the promovendus analyzes the intricate process of resolving an intractable conflict, focusing on a range of failed agreements aimed at ending the Somali civil war between 1991 and 2008. He concludes that the high level of social fragmentation, poor leadership, structural weaknesses, and inherently flawed peace agreements driven largely by external actors ignorant of internal conditions resulted in the development of a militia state which perpetuates the conflict in the interest of select groups. New and alternative non-coercive mediation and negotiation measures are required to address the rise of militia states in the wake of civil wars that have fundamentally destroyed states and the social fabric of their societies. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Albert Edgar Manucci, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Foreign Direct Investment and Transfer of Environmental Sound Technologies, Case Studies in the Energy Sectors of Angola and South Africa, prepared under my supervision and Dr. Yolanda Spies as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the candidate investigated whether foreign direct investment can be used to transfer environmentally sound technologies. His main aim was to bring empirical evidence, conceptual clarity, and interdisciplinary approaches to African policymakers and practitioners involved in foreign direct investment and technology transfer negotiations. He developed a conceptual framework that links government-imposed regulations and agencies as well as international regimes to govern the flow of foreign direct investments. He found out that whereas Angola uses its national legal and policy frameworks to govern the flow to regulate foreign direct investment inflows for the purpose of acquiring environmentally sound technologies in the energy sector, South Africa does not purposefully promote the transfer of environmentally sound technologies through outward foreign direct investment to other African countries such as Uganda. He concluded that host countries or recipient countries of foreign direct investment can invoke their sovereign rights to attract foreign direct environmental sound technologies. He recommends that African policymakers and practitioners should shun a reductionist approach to foreign direct investment and start viewing foreign direct investment as a multidimensional bundle of resources that can contribute to sustainable development. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Mildred Mushinga, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled The Small House, an Ethnographic Investigation into Economically Independent Women and Sexual Networks in Zimbabwe, prepared under my supervision. In her thesis, the promovenda explored how small housing has been addressed mainly from public health and development perspectives, which neglect the intricacies of the complex interconnections between sexual intimacy, desire, economic strategizing, and political maneuvering. Her research showed how women's experiences in small house relationships are intertwined with broader changing social, political, economic, and cultural contexts in which they are located. She concludes, therefore, that there should be a rethink of how women's sexual relationships, women empowerment programs, and HIV/AIDS interventions are formulated and implemented. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Baxter Tawianago, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Living on the Fringes of a Protected Area, Gonare National Park and the Indigenous Communities of Southeast Zimbabwe, 1934 to 2008, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the program vendors examined the interaction between the Gonare National Park and the Shangani communities of southeastern Zimbabwe following the declaration of the land as a game reserve in 1934 and the subsequent eviction of the people. The study noted the competing claims to the Gonare landscape and underscored the fact that the GNP became a site of contestation during the period under focus. The study interrogated the varied responses of the Shangani to their eviction from the GNP and their settlement on the fringes of the park over time and space. It revealed that the evictions ruptured the social, economic, and cultural basis of the people's survival, resulting in the creation of perpetual contestation by the Shangani during the colonial and post-colonial periods. The marginalization and impoverishment of the communities generated anger and frustration, which was expressed through protest poaching, traditional opposition to the scheme, and the forced seizure of part of the park land during Zimbabwe's land reform program. The study makes a significant historiographical contribution to the field of park-induced displacement, and particularly the responses of indigenous communities to eviction and their claims to lands lost during the colonial period. The study also makes an important contribution to the socio-environmental history of southeastern Zimbabwe by renewing debates about land dispossessions, African landscapes, and their people and the indigenous people's interplay with nature. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Melissa Adendorf, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy in History of Ancient Culture with a thesis titled Othered Flesh, Social, Scientific and Critical Spatial Investigations into the tattooed ancient Near Eastern body as space and body in space, prepared under my supervision. In a thesis, the promovenda investigated the critical spatial and social scientific aspects of ancient Mediterranean tattooing practices based on the values which the respective identified cultures attach to the body as space and the body in space. In her results, she identified the common values attributed to the body, the tattooing practice and cultural space throughout the region based on the boundaries that affect the tattooed individuals and their cultures as a whole. The value of this research is the establishment of an interpretative model which may be used to investigate bodily spatiality and othering in both an ancient and modern context, with applications to socio-spatial profiling in the fields of bodily spatiality, tattoo anthropology, sociology, and iconography. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Congratulations.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Pieter Ari Binsbergen, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Philosophia Doctor with a thesis titled The Response of Art Education to the Challenges of a Multimodal World, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the promovendus investigated multimodality in visual art from a socio-semiotic perspective, with a view to design a framework for multimodal teaching and learning in visual art in the further education and higher education training bands. His empirical research comprises a multiple case study of the artworks of 10 winners of a national art competition, with specific emphasis on how multimodality is practiced in these works. The value of his research resides in packaging the linguistic theory of multimodality in a format that can be applied as a heuristic in visual art and used to design a curricular framework for art education, which strengthens the interpretation of artworks designed on a variety of platforms, as well as ground their social relevance in contemporary multimodal communication systems. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Shafika Dokrat, who has complied with the requirements for the degree PhD with a thesis entitled Psychometric Profiling of Students at Risk of Underachievement at the University of Technology, prepared under the supervision of Professor Piet Delaray and with Dr. Malosi Makubela as co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovenda derived the psychometric profile for first-year students at the Tshwane University of Technology, who may be identified as being at risk for academic underachievement, derived from results obtained on the English Literary Skills Assessment, Career Choice Questionnaire, Learning and Study Strategies Inventory, and Emotional Skills Assessment process. The profile may be used as a basis for the recommendation of relevant interventions. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Meneer die vice-rector, ek stel Honorary Jansen van Vuren aan u voor, wat voldoen het aan al die vereistes vir die graad Philosophy Doctor, met 'n proefskrif getiteld van kavalier tot verraaier, zombie tot legoman, mythes en die ideologiese uitbeelding van die held in geselekteerde rolprente en dramareekse oor die Anglo-Boereoorlog en haar kreatiewe werk getiteld Angard Roinek, voorberei onder die promotorskap van professor Henning Pietersen. Die proefskrif is 'n literêre ondersoek waarin gevalle studies ontleed word om die helde en ander argetipes te identifiseer en die skrywers en regisseurs se doelwitte daarmee vas te stel. Die promovenda se toepassing van Christopher Bogle se teorieë oor die helderystruktuur is oorspronklik en deurdag. Haar persoonlike korrespondensie met die rolprent en dramaskeppers beteken dat die perspektiewe in haar studie geboekstaaf word. Hierdie geskiedskrywing lewer 'n bydrae tot die studieveld. Die heromskrywing van die boereheld binne bepaalde eras weerspieël die veranderende siening van Afrikaner identiteit. Die navorsing dien as stewige grondslag vir haar draaiboek. Hier word treffende visuele beelde geskep waar die karakters se handelinge op subtiele wyse hul oortuigings en motiverings ontbloot. Die beeld van beskerming van of skerm vir diself en dit waarvoor die karakters as opponente in die oorlog teenoor mekaar staan, sluit aan by die aangaard in die draaiboek titel. Inderdaad, die stelselmatige stroop van die beskermende elemente van menswees herinner aan die einde van 'n skermgeveg, wanneer die beskermende maskers afgehaal word. Meneer die vice-rektor, ek versoek u om die graad aan haar toe te ken.
Hiermee ken ik die graad Dr. Filosofie toe aan die kandidaat met al die rechten en voorrechten daaraan verbonden.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Thurbon Kiar Kanea, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Team Collaboration in Early Childhood Intervention Services in South Africa, Comparing Professional and Caregiver Perspectives, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Alicia Samuels as the co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovenda makes a unique contribution by ascertaining both professional and caregiver perspectives on collaboration in early childhood intervention services in Gauteng. Collaboration is central to the success of teams, particularly teams addressing the diverse needs of children with disabilities or those at risk for developmental delay and their families. The study involved a novel validation of the survey, as well as a comprehensive translation of the caregiver measure into Setswana in order to ensure linguistic, functional, metric, and cultural equivalence. While professionals and caregivers agree that collaboration in early childhood intervention services require efficient communication, commitment, and mutual respect, as well as adequate resources, the findings of the study also reveal differing perspectives, particularly with respect to the linguistic and cultural challenges between professionals and caregivers within the early childhood intervention team. The study has clinical implications as the measures developed for the study could be used to evaluate and possibly improve collaboration for both caregivers and professionals. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Mr. Daniel Kibi Komen, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Impacts of Climate on Health, a specific focus on malaria in South Africa's Limpopo province. It's prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Jobutai as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus investigated the link between variations in rainfall and temperature in relation to malaria cases in Limpopo province. In his results, rainfall and temperature were found to be very important factors that explain malaria incidences, and that the onset of rainfall triggers malaria season that lasts for 3 months. The value of these results is critical for policy in the design or redesign of malaria intervention programs, especially under climate change. It is also useful in the development of early warning systems for malaria, as well as achieving efficiency in resource allocation within the health sector, given new information regarding the timing of malaria intervention programs. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Dames en here, ons het nou aan die einde van die verrigtinge gekom. Voordat ons afsluit, wil ek graag die aanwesiges uitnooi vir 'n koppie koffie of tee in die tent reg voor die ingang van die Rembrandtsaal. We have now come to the end of the proceedings, ladies and gentlemen. Before we close, I wish to invite all present for refreshments afterwards in the tents situated in front of the Rembrandt Hall. You are requested to stand for the singing of the national anthem and to remain standing until the assembly has been dissolved and the academic procession has left the auditorium. The words of the national anthem are printed on the inside back cover of the program. Please rise. By the powers vested in me, I hereby dissolve this assembly of the University of Pretoria.
Sene cultem, nos ave
Thank you.